welcome back to Budget Day 2024, brought to you by Arise TV and, of course, KPMG. We are live at the Innovation Center in Lagos, Nigeria. Once again, Rotu Sodiri here. And up next, right now, we have, of course, a conversation on a budget in transition. What to expect out of that 28.7 trillion that the senior partner Tola Ademi already broke down for us. We are happy to have the Honorable Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, Minister Abubakar Atiku Bagudu. You're very welcome, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Minister, I want to set the context for our conversation in terms of how the government's macro view, just looking ahead, plans to implement this budget for the sake of the nation, as far as what to expect. When the president presented the budget to the National Assembly, he gave 6 deliverables. 1 was job-rich economic growth. 2 was macroeconomic stability. 3 was an enabling business environment. 4 was human capital development. 5 was reducing poverty. 6 was access to social security. In terms of this budget that we've already looked at, how are you intending to deliver on those key areas?
Thank you. The budget of renewed hope, which is the 2024 budget that Mr. President signed into law on the 1st of January, derives from the renewed hope agenda under the manifesto under which he campaigned and got elected. And in itself, the renewed hope agenda drew from the national consensus that have always existed that we need to grow at a faster rate than we had been growing. The most recent of such consensus is contained in Agenda 2050, which is a long-term perspective plan that was drawn on by, among other, private sector, public sector, subnationals, federal, civil society organizations, and other stakeholders. And that recognizes that we need to grow at a much higher rate of growth than we have been experiencing in the last decade and a half. And equally, we need to mobilize private capital, because the Agenda 2050 estimated that we need investments in the sum of, at a minimum of at least $100 billion, with less than 20% of it coming from the public sector. So meaning most of it should come from the private sector. So rightfully so, President Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, as contained in the renewed hope agenda and the 8-point items of the agenda, says that we need to grow higher. We need to deal with food insecurity, agriculture. We need to generate economic growth and poverty eradication. We need to include all. We need to provide access to capital. We need to enhance transparency, accountability, and rule of law. And to do this, and given what one famous Nigerian, Charles Soludo, described as a very comatose economy that he literally inherited, we need to make choices that are different from choices that have been made before or choices that have been delayed. So, not surprisingly, on day one, the way he was sworn in, he said distortions have to go. Fuel subsidy distortions, and later on foreign exchange subsidy, and the institutional realignment that the Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning needs to be separate from Ministry of Finance to sanction the fact that planning and budget, our budget should emanate from a plan, and we must maintain a plan, and that institutional alignment is what brought the division, that a plan-based budget, which is part of what the 2024 budget is, and a budget that will support the restoration of macroeconomic stability. And it is such restoration that we believe will give the private sector the pride of place or confidence that they can invest. So removal of distortions, fuel subsidy, foreign exchange market, rule-based participation, and in the 2024 budget in particular, reduction in deficit. Well, it might not look a big number, but in terms of in percentage terms, a drop from 6.11% debt to deficit ratio in 2023 to less than 4% in 2024 is a significant number, and it is being noticed by investors. In all the 3 rating agencies around the world that have commented, that have improved their outlook on Nigeria, commented among others about that significant improvement. Equally, the budget provides for an increase in capital expenditure, which has been very difficult to achieve. The chart that was very ably presented by Tola showed an over 9 trillion naira. But that's even is understated by the fact that if you disaggregate the statutory transfers, they also have a capital element, which in total now will bring capital spending to almost 11 trillion. And that to us is very significant because that's about 39% of the budget. And what it meant is that we are putting money in the priority, more money in the priority areas, both in relative and in absolute terms. We have both in the supplementary appropriation that preceded the budget and in the budget provided more for national security and defense, so that those economic activities that are impaired by the perception or by actual insecurity will quickly dissipate, and we can mobilize domestic production as quickly as possible by, among others, increased spending in agriculture and food security, increased spending in infrastructure to help with the logistics, and not ignoring that we have to invest in human capital. Education spending has gone up, health spending has gone up. We have even provided, and Mr. President was very proud of it, a 100 billion naira school feeding fund, which is to support both the retention, mobilization of our children and remaining in school, and even begin to address the grey matter on the investment, which is nutritional deficiency that is being experienced by a significant chunk of our populace. Equally, investment in housing, power, steel, as well as innovation. The science and technology spending has gone up, digital economy, and the creative economy, and as well as provision of funds that are to support the de-risking and the de-risking of some sectors, and even provided the needed impetus for growth. Example, consumer credit, a 100 billion naira fund is provided to help mobilize and crowd in and de-risk consumer credit, so that the manufacturing sector can worry less about customers who needs to pay upfront.
Minister, I just want to jump in here. Just real quick, you mentioned, my second question to you, of course, is you've got the vision, you have what you're planning to do, but then there's vision and then there's the reality, right? You mentioned domestic manufacturing. I want to use an example using defense. The 3.2 trillion that's been allocated, as was shown in the chart there, use it, whatever exchange rate you want, whether it's the 874 on the NAFEM window from yesterday or 1002 of the parallel market, it comes out to about $3 billion. The Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Musa, he was on Arise News. We had an exclusive with him after those unfortunate bombings, the accidental bombings in Kaduna, that local government. And he said, and I quote, there is the amount that is allocated, and then there's the amount that we get. And he said, I was speaking to my colleagues on Newsnight, the segment that we had him on, where he said, I challenge you to ask how much is allocated. And he gave an example. And he said, for Tucano jets, the fighter jets, about 12 of them cost $600 million. If you add in other items that the military needs, you're pushing to almost $1 billion, right? So you've got a budget allocation, and that's recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure. I'm just lumping the two of them together, of about $3 billion, and yet just your equipment for the military is close to almost 30% of that amount, right? Without adding overheads and everything else. And he also said something very key. He said that our lack of manufacturing capacity means that we have to import all these military equipment from overseas, which also now puts pressure on the exchange rate. So the reality, Honorable Minister, is the vision of the budget matching up with the Nigeria's realities as we see them today?
Well, I think maybe that's an example that maybe can be explained differently, because when you talk about a jet, equipment, these are amortized over a period. So if I have spent a lot of money to procure a jet, then in fact my capital spending for that item should come down in the preceding years, because to borrow from that example, the capital spending is something that maybe, I think I'm on firm ground saying it in this room, that is amortized over a long period of time rather than in just one budgeting year. What it calls for is maintenance and maybe now increasingly software upgrades. But if you are saying that maybe we need more spending, yes, I'm not, because our spending as a proportion of our GDP compared to other countries is still very small, which is a function of the fact that compared to countries that have close to collect 50% of their GDP as revenue, we are still collecting about 10%, even though a presidential tax reform committee has been put in place to take it to at least 18% in the next 3 years. So are we under spending? Yes.
Okay, fine. More on the fundamentals in terms of the metrics for the budget. So exchange rates, I know it moved from 750 to like 850. You've got, I think you're looking at inflation for 2024 of about, I think it was 21% or so at 28. And also revenues, again, when the KPMG senior partner and CEO of KPMG West Africa was putting up the revenues, I have to ask you about the revenue side now. We are projecting 1.78 million barrels per day of production, right? Again, Arise News spoke with Mr. Heineke Lokobore, Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, I think for oil, and he said you're going for 2 million, right? Now we did like 1.2 last year. Again, is that realistic? Are you realistically expecting to get to, maybe we can do 1.7 or even 2, and how are you going to get there to bring in the revenues to support this budget?
We believe that our budget should challenge all of us to do better. People should work hard to even earn their jobs. We have done it before. We have produced to that level, and there's no reason why we should not. So, Mr. President's vision is that we should be bold, we should challenge everyone, and we are not callous in that assumption. We believe that the security gains that are being made, the efforts that are being made to check insecurity, and even other forms of tools that are being used to limit what is available for the Nigerian populace that are being checked, will all bring to bear. as well as increased investment that proposals that we have seen and actual investment that have come in. We are confident that we will challenge everyone to ensure that we produce at least to that level. And having in mind that in our oil sector, there's production does not even count for the OPEC quota, but is nevertheless valuable and provide equivalent to the barrels we are looking for.
I want to ask you about stranded assets. It's been projected, I believe, by the chair of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform. Nigeria has an estimated, I believe, about 80 trillion of stranded assets, which could yield about 10 trillion of revenue on an annual basis. I want to ask you about the plans of Nigeria to utilize those stranded assets to bring in revenue, because I want to use Egypt as an example. Just last November, Egypt, by selling stakes in tobacco, steel, and other assets, Egypt has generated about $2 billion, and they're planning to get more, and they have an IMF program, and it's part of their program with the IMF and so on and so forth. So what are the plans for those stranded assets that are just sitting idle that we could use to generate revenue? What's the movement?
I think the first institutional reform that has taken place is the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, which is very well popularly known as MOPI, has been strengthened and has been given clarity that all stranded assets or government assets that are not put to good use should be identified, should be made available for potential investors, whether in partnership with Ministry of Finance Incorporated, as well as the proposed Ministry of Petroleum Incorporated, which will also do the same for assets in the energy sector. And the board of the Ministry of Finance Incorporated has been strengthened, and they have been very aggressive in the last few months in terms of doing identifying assets and marketing them to investors.
So also want to ask you about the cost of running government, which of course has been brought up. You've heard all the headlines. I don't need to rehash the headlines to you, SUVs and things like that. How serious? I mean, of course, personal finance, you either want to raise your revenue or you cut spending to get what you need to do, get where you need to get to in terms of targets. So what are the concrete plans to cut spending in order to make this budget a reality?
Well, the first one is it shows that we tamed the growth in recurrent, non-debt recurrent expenditure, which is a significant indicator. And we are interrogating all other contributors to the recurrent. But one of the major issues has been over the years growth in personnel cost. Even though there has been numerous reports, or a very significant report that shows that maybe we should have institutional realignment so that government efficiency will increase. And I'm sure in the 2024 fiscal year we will see measure to implement that, which will support further reduction. But a constraining factor, and it's always good to say that when, especially in a situation where you are fighting insecurity, you need more boots on ground, so as the saying goes. And because people are ordinarily posted outside or undertaking duty outside their normal postings, you will find that again allowances that you need to take care of them are literally become inflexible downward. But that is not to say we are unmindful of more measures that can be taken. Mr. President, just to further demonstrate and warn that he meant business, just announced additional cost-saving measures by the president, vice president, and other categories of public servants. And we'll be seeing more of that during the year.
Honorable Minister, how quickly do you think matters can move in order to get this budget going? Because the reason why I ask is that we're already in 2024. 2027 is an election year. So really, you've got this year, probably 2025. We can argue 2026 things can get going. Is there enough time to make a significant impact with this budget on those 6 items I mentioned earlier on?
Certainly. The team is determined under the able leadership of Mr. President. On signing the budget, he left nobody in any doubt that if any team member feels he cannot contribute to that, maybe he should excuse him or herself. That is as serious as it can get. And those who know Mr. President very well know that he meant what he says. And so people are, again, in the signing ceremony, he said that ministries, department, and agencies should take responsibility. And he meant it in the most serious. And these things are achievable. It just demands on all of us, particularly public officials, to ensure that we put in the extra effort to achieve those targets that are set forth, and they are achievable.
Are the ministries, is there a handshake between the ministries? And I just, or are they working in silos? For instance, the ICT ministry, for example, the minister of, that is Dr. Bosun Tijani, you need electricity for what he intends to achieve with broadband connectivity, internet penetration, and all the things he wants to do with the ICT and digital economy. You need power for that. So and you are the head of this as the Minister of Budget and Economic Planning. You're overseeing all this. So is there a handshake where Bosun Tijani is talking to the Minister of Power, Dilabo, and saying, hey, listen, this is what I need? Is there synergy between the ministries?
There are 2 coordinating ministers. A coordinating minister for the economy, and the person of Olewale Edu, who actually said I should offer his apologies. As we speak, I'm sure he's on a roll, maybe between Kaduna and Kano, seeing what is happening to the road infrastructure as part of that coordinating mechanism, and as well as a coordinating minister for health and social service. There are structures that have even been brought in and enhanced for the team to work. But just like as everyone who observes team formation knows that even if you bring the best team members, it takes a while before they practice the team building is coherent. So I believe that Mr. President has provided the avenue and the institutional structure for the team to work effectively together. And the team are getting to know each other very well, and the teamwork is.
Minister, as you can see from here, I have a whole list of questions, but we're out of time, so I just have to wrap up. Do we have a revenue or spending problem? I have to throw that to you finally before we wrap up. What problem?
Answer. 3 months ago, Mr. President directed me to chair a meeting of a visiting European Union team of commissioners led by the International Commissioner for Partnership. And while we are waiting for the program to start, one of our, on the Nigerian side, told her proudly how we intended to collect more revenues, moving it to 18%. She said she's from Ireland, and she said she's among the lowest in Europe at 30%. But we need to be quick, because sometimes their taxpayers cannot understand why they are giving money to those who will not be able to collect revenues from their own people. So that's just, I think that underscores our revenue challenge has been there, and we have recognized it. We can do better, and we have a president who is very clear. He's very profound in the way he thinks, and his ambitions are realistic. And we believe we will double this economy, we'll collect more revenue, even without increasing tax rates, so that public investment will improve.
Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, Honorable Bagudu, we thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.